Hello and welcome to the Maths Mastery at St Bede's presentation. I've put these slides together on this slideshow to help you better understand the Maths Mastery programme that we've adopted here at St Bede's School. My name's Matthew Sharkey and I'm the Maths Coordinator at St Bede's School. The maths has changed a little bit in the way that we teach it within the school over the last year or so, and will be as we head forward. So this is just to help you better understand the maths that we will be teaching within our school. As with any school and with anything really, we always strive for the absolute best for our children, the best progress that they can make. And so we've reflected on the teaching that we were currently doing and looking to improve that and to help those results to get even better, help those children to be challenged further and to achieve the best results that they can. So these slides are here to help you understand our style a little bit better. So to begin with, and obviously really importantly, we've had a look at what the national curriculum itself says. Obviously the national curriculum changed a little bit a few years ago, and so we've looked closely at what they've said about maths and used that to adopt the approach that we have within our school. So reading quickly for you what it says: become fluent in the fundamentals of mathematics, including through varied and frequent practice with increasingly complex problems over time, so that pupils develop conceptual understanding and the ability to recall and apply knowledge rapidly and accurately. Reason mathematically by following a line of inquiry, conjecturing relationships and generalizations, and developing an argument, justification or proof using mathematical language. Can solve problems by applying their mathematics to a variety of routine and non-routine problems with increasing sophistication, including breaking down problems into a series of simpler steps and persevering in seeking solutions. So you'll be able to see on the screen here that I've highlighted some of the really important words that I think really stand out and really in particular apply to the Maths Mastery programme that we're using within our school. Lots of those things there are about really challenging the children, but making sure that we do that with the correct steps, the correct approach, the correct sequence of learning to ensure that they're able to continue to apply the maths that they're learning to a range and variety of different types of problems and really deepening their understanding, as it says, through routine and non-routine problems to make sure they really get to grips with the things that we're teaching them through each year. So within our school now, using the teaching mastery approach, there are 5 key concepts that run through our planning, our teaching and the learning that the children will be doing in class during maths lessons. The first of these is coherence, which you can see importantly running through the rest of those concepts. And this is the idea that lessons are broken down into small connected steps that gradually unfold the concept, providing access for all children and leading to a generalization of the concept and the ability to apply that concept to a range of contexts. So it's really thinking in particular about those small connected steps and progression over time, making sure that children are able to access the next bit of their learning because they're really strong and secure in the first bit that they were to learn. The next section is the representation and structure. So representations are used in lessons to expose the mathematical structure being taught. The aim being that students can do the maths without recourse to the representation. So the representation and structure really is there alongside the learning that we're doing to sort of help the children understanding what it is they're looking at specifically. This could be using things such as Numicon or bar models or Deans, things like this that we can use to get them to really understand what the numbers are and what the maths is that they're learning about. Eventually, we then try to push them so that they move away from the representation structure because they have a good understanding and can move on to some of the more trickier concepts. So the next concept is the mathematical thinking. And when this is taught, ideas are to be understood deeply. They must not merely be passively received, but must be worked on by the student throughout, with reasoned and discussion with others. So this is where we're particularly applying it to a range of different types of problems, and they're using their skills to really think carefully and reason through their problem solving. So this is less of the arithmetic and more about applying these problems to real life scenarios. The next section is the fluency section, a really, really important section that we strive to achieve for our students. And this is the quick and efficient recall of facts and procedures, and the flexibility to move between different contexts and representations, but to still have those known facts in their head. So this is things such as knowing times tables and knowing number bonds, and things that children know about the numbers and they're quickly able to recall to apply to different types of maths. And finally, the last of these 5 concepts is variation. So variation is twofold. It's firstly about how our teachers represent the concept being taught, and this is often in more than one way to draw attention to different aspects to do with a problem. And as well as that, it's really about the children looking at as many different types of a certain question as they can. So for instance, if they were to be doing adding, they look at several different ways that we could do addition. We could just have a really simple number sentence. We could move the numbers around so that there's different numbers within that sentence that they have to be working out. We could place it in a part-whole model, or indeed we could apply it to a whole range of real-life problem-solving questions, again trying to push them on from just learning about the arithmetic side of things, but applying their adding or whatever skill it might be to a range of scenarios. So what can we take away from those 5 key concepts? Because that was quite in depth there. I mean, really what mastery is in particular is deep and sustainable learning. And I think that word sustainable is extremely important. The deeper that we go into whatever type of learning it is, whatever the objective might be for that lesson or that week indeed, the deeper we go into it and the more varieties that we do of it, the more practicing and fluency we do of it, the more mathematical thinking and applying it to reasoning problems we do of it, the more time we spend on that, and as many different ways looking at that objective as possible will really ensure that that learning is sustainable and it's not something the children are going to forget either later that year or indeed as they move up through the school. The second thing that I think mastery really stands out is the ability to build on something that's already been learned. And again, without that sustainability, without really understanding what they're doing, they will not be able to do this. We really make sure that they're spending a lot of time looking carefully and at a variety of ways of the curriculum within their year group so that they can build on that for later in the year and indeed as they progress up through the school. The third thing, the ability to reason about a concept and make connections. So this is when the children are potentially in an assessment or they're given a question, maybe perhaps a little bit more out of the blue, that they're not always at first sure on what do I need to do, what skills do I have to solve this problem. But that's what we try to do, is try to ensure that we spend a good amount of time on each objective throughout the year so that later in the year when they come across other problems, they're able to apply the maths that they've already learned and make connections within maths. And finally, to have a conceptual and procedural fluency. So this really is to make sure that the children are able to solve both arithmetic problems and maths reasoning problem solving questions, which is really what maths is all about. Is maths is applying things into real life and being able to use maths in the real world. So we try to move on just from the procedural, not just the procedural, but into the conceptual as well. So how do we achieve this? Well, some of the things that we've been thinking about and applying within our maths lessons are particularly spending longer on a maths topic. Previous to now, in previous years, children would not spend a great deal of time looking at, say, fractions as a topic. They would do some fractions that week, then they would come back to learning fractions again in the spring term and come back to learning fractions again in the summer term. However, what we've really now thought about as St Bede's is thinking about the sequence of learning to ensure that we spend more time just learning about fractions and really immersing ourselves for a number of weeks within fractions or multiplication or adding or subtraction or whatever the topic might be, but spending more time looking carefully at all of the objectives within that area of maths. As well as that, the intelligent practice and variation of small steps again really applies. So similar to what I've been saying previously, but we make sure that we don't rush the children through a topic. We actually spend time making small variations, slight changes, and this becomes progressively more challenging for the children so that they can challenge themselves and raise their expectations as well as they begin to learn more and more about an area of maths that they're doing. It's also to do with the detail in exploring of the concept. All areas are exposed and linked to ensure that there is a clear coherence for the children. Again, for instance, if I was to say fractions, with fractions there's a lot of different areas. It could be just looking at what is a quarter, what is a half, and then moving ourselves on to ordering fractions. It could then be moving on to adding them, multiplying them as they move up throughout the school. So it's about spending time on each area and making sure we really have a firm understanding of the national curriculum for that year group. And finally, questioning is extremely important, not just for the teachers questioning the children, but the children questioning themselves. Why is the maths the way it is? Why is 3 + 2 5? Why is 8 × 6 48? Whatever it might be, about spending time looking at why maths is the way that maths is. So again, here I think it's really worth highlighting one more time that it's depth and not acceleration. The old curriculum, where it was focused more on levels, the government spent more time really trying to push pace and rushing the children through their learning, moving them on to concepts that they weren't actually able to access completely yet. And that's where the children would begin to fall apart if they were moving on to things far too quickly. Whereas the new national curriculum really encourages a study of fewer skills in greater depth. And this is what mastery is to spend more time looking at less things. And the national curriculum has allowed us to do that within the school. We're still obviously covering all of the national curriculum and objectives for each year group, but it's about spending more time and looking at the variety of different types of problems within each objective. So how do we know that maths mastery works as an approach? Well, we know it works for a number of reasons. There are hundreds of schools up and down the country which have already adopted maths mastery as an approach, or are in the process of adopting maths mastery as an approach. And importantly, one of the reasons that many schools are doing this, and St Bede's as a school, we are now adopting this, is there has been significant research done into what effects maths mastery has on children. One of the more well-known groups, the EEF, found that pupils on average made 1 month's additional progress after a year. So if you think about that over the course of a child's time in primary school, spending 7 years in a primary school, that could add up to being 7 months extra progress compared to their peers or compared to other children of their age who have not received maths mastery as an approach. As well as this, it's also been found through more research that on average, children who use the maths mastery approach achieve 2 points higher than the national average in the Key Stage 2 national tests. And this is particularly interesting as many of the schools that have adopted maths mastery and approach are with children who were particularly struggling previously and have actually now found that their scores have increased dramatically. As a school at St Bede's, we have always done well with our SATs results. However, as mentioned before, we're always looking to push our children further as well and to increase their scores and their capability. As well as this, importantly, the National Centre for Excellence in Teaching of Mathematics have adopted this and indeed are offering training throughout the country for teachers, staff to get to grips with maths mastery as an approach. Importantly as well, perhaps most importantly for me, being maths coordinator in our school, is to consider what effect it's actually had in our school. And last year, during the 2019-2020 academic year, we did begin to use trial maths mastery within our school, both in Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, and we're so pleased with the results that we found. The data found that there was more progress being made by children, that their assessment results were improving, and also really importantly for me, both the teachers and the pupils within our school, the feedback that I got off them and the language that the children were using when they were discussing their maths with me and their teachers was so much better, that we know that this works as an approach and will now be used throughout our school. So I think it's important as well for you to understand the way that our lessons are being taught within the school, considering those 5 concepts of the mastery lessons, but also what an actual lesson will look like within our school. And this is across our school, even as low as our early years children, that they will still be accessing the same sort of style of lesson, perhaps with not quite the same timings, but they will still be accessing lessons within early years as well as across the school. So the first section of our lessons are called the discover and share part of the lesson, and this is where we will start the children off with some form of starter to get their brains warming up, perhaps applying those fluency skills to get their brains really thinking about the maths for that day. And then we will begin to introduce them to whatever objective there is that they will be looking at in the national curriculum that day. And during this time, as it says, discovering and sharing, this is when they will be coming across something new, an objective that they won't have necessarily come across so far that year. However, because they've been building on their previous learning, either from that year or from a previous year, again thinking about the small steps of progression, they will still have some skills that they can begin to use to help them work out and discover the objective for today. And during this time, we really encouraged lots of chat between peers, lots of chat with the teacher, and there's lots of discussion within the class so that the children are using their mathematical language and are beginning to understand the objective for that day. At this point as well, the children will feed back some of their learning and some of their understanding to the teacher. There'll be some questions for them to have a go at answering, and the teacher will begin to help them in understanding what it is that they're doing for that lesson. Moving on to the next session of the lesson, this is very similar. So this is the think together section, and this is where the teacher, having already shared some of these ideas and beginning to help them understand how to solve today's problems, how to solve today's maths questions, the children are giving another set of questions, perhaps only 1 or 2 questions at this stage. And again, we really encourage here lots of discussion between peers and again with the teacher, but also at this stage is where they begin to get some of this maths into their books and they begin to actually solve some problems within their books, answering some questions. But again, we think this is a really important part of the lesson for children to use their mathematical language, and also for us as teachers to pick up on any misconceptions that we can address with the children. The third section of the lesson is the practice section of the lesson. So at this stage, the teacher will be confident that the children are getting to grips with the objectives for that lesson and have begun to solve some problems together as a class, and the children will be provided some questions that they will then answer a little more independently, so less time spent here on discussion with partners and more time actually solving the questions on their own. And we really like this part of the lesson because it allows the children to access as many questions as they can get through in the lesson and try to push themselves on to some more challenging problems. The problems during this section, the practice section, get sequentially more challenging and varied, again using that variation throughout the lesson to ensure that they're pushing themselves and challenging themselves as much as possible. And finally, at the end of the lesson, we have the reflection section of the lesson, which is a really important section at the very end of the lesson, where we will spend 5 minutes or so at the end of the lesson ensuring that as a class we know what it is that we've learned today, we know how we're going to apply that tomorrow in tomorrow's lesson, and as we go forward that we've learned something new from the national curriculum. And finally, I just also wanted to mention within this slide the idea of support and challenge for all within our lessons. The lessons themselves are taught so that everybody is accessing the same objective, everybody is accessing the objective that we're learning about from that year group's national curriculum. It may be that if we discover there is something that the children are finding more tricky, sometimes we will need to bring elements of the previous year group's objectives in to support that, but we really do our absolute best to ensure that the children are accessing that year group, the group that they're in's objectives. In terms of the support and the challenge, the support is there for the children in a number of ways. One of the ways that the support is there is through discussion with mixed ability pairings, and we ensure that all of our children are mixed together so that they don't feel on their own. In that discussion time, they're able to discuss their maths with other people. Perhaps it could be that the person they're working with is a little bit more comfortable and a little bit more confident, and is able to help them through, and then they begin to pick up that confidence themselves. As well as that, the teacher and the teaching assistant within the classroom will be looking to identify anyone who is finding it more challenging, and we'll be able to sit with them and to help them work through some of that maths as well. We also, as mentioned previously, really like to use the representations and structures to support our children. So if they're finding something more difficult, they can use things like place value charts or Numicon or lots of the other things that I've mentioned previously to support their learning, to help them understand what it is that we're doing in the lesson. And with regards to challenge for children, we really think it's really important for children to be spending more time deepening their understanding of objectives. We try not to push them on too quickly to say something in the next year group. It's much more valuable to find lots of variations and non-standard variations of the objective that they should be learning about within their year group. As well as that, their language skills are being developed a lot more. So when we apply things to real life reasoning word problems, the children are being pushed to actually explain the maths that they've done, and not just to give an answer, but they're actually able to talk through and able to reason what it is that they've done, either with their peers or indeed with the teacher. And those children as well can challenge themselves as much as they like by pushing themselves on to get onto those more tricky mathematical thinking and more tricky variation problems as the lesson progresses. So these are the different resources that we use here within St Bede's. These resources all adopt the mastery style approach to mathematics. They all follow the exact long-term overview and medium-term overview for the children, which matches up with what we're doing within the school. These resources are used to support planning within the school, to support teaching of lessons, and indeed sometimes to support the questioning that the children receive. And teachers spend time looking through each of these different resources to make sure that they're using the absolute best resource that fits in with the objective the children are learning that day. The Maths Shed, White Rose Maths, Power Maths, and the NCET and Maths Spines, as well as the Twinkle Deep Dive, are used throughout our school in all year groups. The Primary Stars Maths is currently used in Key Stage 1, and the number blocks in particular is used in early years, but also some support as well within Year 1. And the IC Reasoning at the bottom there is used as well throughout our school in all year groups to help with mathematical thinking. One other resource that we are using within our school is a Mastery Weekly Skills Check. This is predominantly used in Key Stage 2 at the moment, with some elements used in Key Stage 1. The idea is that there are 25 questions that the children will be solving each week, and those 25 questions match up to the national curriculum objectives that they have to solve throughout their time within that year group. This is particularly useful as we can begin to pre-teach things that the children will come across later that year, and therefore they're not as stressed or worried about those things when we come on to learning them. They've already been exposed to them and had a go to access them. They're able to apply their maths that they're already learning and make connections to new questions, and also in particular obviously to practice the fluency side of things and to sustain their learning throughout the year so that they're not forgetting things that we taught, say, in the autumn term. We're coming back to those each week and they're getting the chance to practice those things. The children particularly love this. We found great feedback from the children as well as staff last year, but the children particularly loved the fact that they could see their scores improving week on week. There's a new test every week with the same types of questions, and they love the fact that they get to see their scores increase as the year goes on. Moving on now to have a look at some of the other areas in our school. So morning maths is something that all year groups are encouraged to take part in during the week. This is something that happens 3 or 4 days a week, where the children will arrive during registration in the morning and there'll be some maths on the board for them to complete, some maths problems. This is good for 2 reasons. One, it's really good for fluency practice, so things that the children have been learning during that week, we often put problems on the board that relate to those, so again they're practicing those skills that they've learned during the week. And the other thing it's really good for as well is pre-teaching, which is fantastic because the children can be exposed to some of the maths that they might actually be learning later that day, and it already gives them a little head start before they enter that lesson. Moving on to times tables, we have times tables testing within our school. So every single week, once a week, the children will be tested on their target times tables, and they get to progress up within their class, moving through the different times table stages. We also have times table rock stars for children to practice at home, which is a fantastic resource. Can't recommend enough for the children to go on there and to keep practicing as much as they can. They can never do enough times tables practice, and it's fantastic to see their time and their scores increase as they progress. And finally, moving on to assessment. We do assess in our school once every half term, usually at the end of the half term, the last week before the term ends. And this is for a couple of reasons. One, it's fantastic for the children themselves to see their progression and to see how they're moving on with their learning, to see their scores increasing throughout the year and taking some ownership of their learning. And second of all, really importantly for the teachers themselves, because then we can identify any gaps in their learning and address that within the teaching. And finally, how you can help from home. We greatly appreciate anything that you do with the children at home to support us within school. The most important thing is that the children will be completing their homework each week. The children will always be set at least one maths piece of homework each week, and very often and usually this relates to the My Maths website, which the children will have logins for. If they log into the My Maths website, they are able to access a lesson and some questions from something based on that they've been doing within class. Often as well, the teacher might leave a note on that lesson just to help you, so that you can use that to help them at home. As well as that, we do really encourage, as part of our homework, the children to continue practicing on times table Rockstar, as I mentioned in the last slide. And moving on to the second thing there, the times tables practice. I think that's one of the biggest things that you can do with your children at home. Sometimes we can get too much to overworking them with challenging them with too many things, but I think you can never challenge them with enough times tables practice. That is something that I would really encourage you to do at home with them. And finally, just to mention, really importantly, the school calculation policy for how we work out different areas of maths is on our website, so please do log into the website to have a look at our calculation policy. Obviously this is quite important because there is a number of different ways that you can sometimes solve areas of maths, and it's quite useful if you are using the same methods that we're using within school, so the children don't get confused too much between too many different methods. And finally, just to say thank you for watching. If there's any other questions that you do have, please feel free to either have a chat to your class teacher about that. I'm sure they'd be very happy to help, or else please do feel free to email into the school office. The email address is on the school website, and I myself would be very happy to answer any questions. Thank you.